Okay, chapter 4. Day after day I flew to the store. Grandpa would shake his head. Then on a Monday, as I entered the store, I sensed a change in him. He was in high spirits, talking and laughing with half a dozen farmers. Every time I caught his eye, he would smile and wink at me. I thought the farmers would never leave, but finally the store was empty. Okay, so um, this was a Monday. He kept coming to his grandpa's store and just to, figure out if he had ordered his dogs yet. Or I guess if they had dogs for sale, and if the kennels were still available. Monday, and he said Monday he entered the store and he sensed the changes in his grandpa. So he was really excited. So Billy probably thought, oh, Grandpa's excited, so probably, maybe, he talked to the kennel people. Grandpa told me the letter had come. The kennels were still there and they had dogs for sale. He said he had made the mail buggy wait while he made out the order. And another thing, the dog market had gone downhill. The prices of dogs had dropped $5. He handed me a $10 bill. Now there's still one stump in the way, he said. The mail buggy can't carry things like dogs, so they'll come as far as the depot at Tahlequah. But you'll get the notice here because I ordered them in your name. Okay, so Grandpa's saying the kennels from the ad were still there. So the kennels is where they had the dogs for sale. And they were still, because it's been 2 years. Remember, it took him 2 years to save all this money. So so in 2 years, they could have closed down. They could have no longer been there, but they were still there. And the dogs were cheaper, and so he had $10 left over from his $50 because they were $20 each instead of $25 each. But they won't bring the dogs all the way to their town, so they would only come all the way to the depot at Tahlequah, which must be another town. So that means that somehow Billy was going to have to get to that town. Okay. Let me do something, make it a little clearer. There we go. I thanked my grandfather with all my heart and asked him how long I'd have to wait for the notice. So the notice is the notice of when the dogs are ready to be picked up from Tahlequah. He said, I don't know, but it shouldn't take more than a couple of weeks. I asked how I was going to get my dogs out from Tahlequah. Well, there's always someone going in, he said, and you could ride in with them. That evening, the silence of our supper was interrupted when I asked my father this question. Papa, how far is it to Kentucky? Okay, so they were eating dinner, and then all of a sudden Billy just asked that question. I may well have exploded a bomb. For an instant, there was complete silence, and then my oldest sister giggled. The two little ones stared at me. With a half-hearted laugh, my father said, well, now, I don't know, but it's a pretty good ways. What do you want to know for? Thinking of taking a trip to Kentucky? No, I said, I just wondered. My youngest sister giggled and said, can I go with you? I glared at her. Why did he glare at her? Not because she did anything wrong, but because he was just trying to subtly just be subtle and just ask, how far Kentucky was, but he didn't want them thinking he was going anywhere near Kentucky. So then when the youngest sister said, can I go with you? He's like, oh, she's putting too much attention on me and making it seem like I'm going there. So that's why he got mad. Mama broke into the conversation. I declare, what kind of question is that? How far is it to Kentucky? I don't know what's gotten into that mind of yours lately. You go around like you were lost and you're losing weight. You're as skinny as a rail. And look at that hair. Just last Sunday, they had a hair cutting over at Tom Rowland's place, but you couldn't go. You had to go prowling around the river in the woods. So Mama got stressed out over the question because she said something's going on with Billy. Because first he starts asking about Kentucky, and then there was a hair cutting event, and he never got his hair cut, so his hair is looking a mess. And all he does is just go into the river in the woods, prowling around, instead of getting his hair cut. And he's losing weight. He's getting so skinny. So Mama's just worried about him again. I told Mama that I get a haircut next time they had a hair cutting. And I just heard some fellows talking about Kentucky up at the store and wonder how far away it was. Much to my relief, the conversation was ended. So I wonder, because they're asking about Kentucky, so I wonder if that's just where the kennels were. I think that's where the kennels were. So let's see. Let me see. Okay. Yes, there we go. See, so in chapter, see, I didn't remember that. In chapter 3, it says the advertisement was from a kennel in Kentucky. So that's why he was asking, because that's where the kennels were. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, let's keep it moving. The days dragged by. A week passed and still no word about my dogs. Terrible thoughts ran through my mind. Maybe my dogs were lost. The train had a wreck. Someone stole my money. Or perhaps the mailman lost my order. Then at the end of the second week, the notice came. So Billy was getting a little bit impatient and worried because, you know, a week passed by and he hadn't heard anything about his dogs. He didn't know. He was thinking, oh my gosh, maybe my dogs were lost. Maybe the train who was carrying my dogs had a wreck. You know, they got into an accident. Maybe someone stole my money and never got my dogs. Or maybe the mailman lost his order. But then after 2 weeks, he got the notice that his dogs were ready to get picked up. My grandfather told me that he had talked to Jim Hodges that day. He was going into town in about a week, and I could ride in with him to pick up my dogs. Again, I thanked my grandfather. So he went to talk to his grandpa, and his grandpa said, hey, Jim Hodges, he's going to go into town, into, Tahlequah. Into Tahlequah. He's going to go into Tahlequah in a week. So in a week, you can go get your dogs. So he thanked his grandpa and started for home. Walking along in deep thought, I decided it was time to tell my father the whole story. I fully intended to tell him that evening, and I tried several times, but somehow I couldn't. I wasn't scared of him, for he never whipped me. He was always kind and gentle, but for some reason, I don't know why, I just couldn't tell him. Okay, so he wanted to tell his dad all about dogs, but he just couldn't. He didn't know what to say, how to tell him. That night, snuggled deep in the soft folds of a feather bed, I lay thinking. I had waited so long for my dogs, and I so desperately wanted to see them and hold them. I didn't want to wait a whole week. In a flash, I made up my mind. Very quietly, I got up and put on my clothes. I sneaked into the kitchen and got one of Mama's precious flour sacks. In it, I put 6 eggs, some leftover cornbread, a little salt, and a few matches. Next, I went to the smokehouse and cut off a piece of salt pork. I stopped at the barn and picked up a gunny sack. I put the flour sack inside the gunny sack. This I rolled up and crammed lengthwise in the bib of my overalls. I was on my way. I was going after my dogs. Okay, so Billy did not want to wait the full week, so he just decided to pack some food and start going off to go pick up his dogs all on his own. And it was nighttime, so he was supposed to be sleeping. So in the middle of the night, he decided to leave his dogs. To leave his house and go get the dogs. Tahlequah was a small country town with a population of about 800. By the road, it was 32 miles away, but as the crow flies, it was only 20 miles. I went as the crow flies straight through the hills. Okay, so if you go on the road, that's what he means by this. So Tahlequah was a small town, and if you walked over there and you were using the road to get there, it was 32 miles. But, roads, they go around hills, around everything. But if you just go straight through, then it was less than 32 miles. It was only 20 miles. So he did that, just went straight through the hills. That way he doesn't have to go on long, winded roads, and it's not longer. Although I had never been to town in my life, I knew what direction to take. Tahlequah and the railroad lay on the other side of the river from our place. I had the Frisco Railroad on my right and the Illinois River on my left. Not far from where the railroad crossed the river lay the town of Tahlequah. I knew if I bore to the right, I would find the railroad, and if I bore to the left, I had the river to guide me. Okay, so he'd never been to town in his life, but he knew how to get to Tahlequah because he knew as long as he had the railroad on his right and the river, Illinois River, to his left, then he knew that he was going the right way because he knew that was the way. Sometime that night, I crossed the river on a riffle somewhere in the Dripping Springs country. Coming out of the river bottoms, I scattered up a long hodgeback ridge and broke out on top of the flats. In a mile-eating trot, I moved along. I had the wind of a deer, the muscles of a country boy, a heart full of dog love, and a strong determination. I wasn't scared of the darkness or the mountains, for I was raised in those mountains. Okay, so he left that night and he started going up out of the river bottoms. He said up the Hodgeback Ridge, and then he went to Flatland. Okay, and he said he was not scared of anything because he wasn't scared of the mountains because he was raised in there. So he wasn't scared of the darkness either, and he was so full of determination. On and on, mile after mile, I moved along. I saw faint gray streaks appear in the east. I knew daylight was close. My bare feet were getting sore from the flint rocks and the saw briars. I stopped beside the mountain stream, soaked my feet in the cool water, rested for a spell, and then started on. Okay, so remember, he's barefoot. And barefoot, he's traveling, on all this rocky terrain, on all of this brush everywhere. Like, there's branches, there's stuff that poke your feet. So his feet get tired after a while and get really hurt. So he just decided to, dip them in cold water so that they don't hurt as bad before moving on. After leaving the mountain stream, my pace was much slower. The muscles of my legs were getting stiff. Feeling the pangs of hunger gnawing at my stomach, I decided I would stop and eat at the next stream I found. Then I remembered I had forgotten to include a can in which to boil my eggs. Okay, so he was starting to get really tired. His muscles were starting to hurt, and he was starting to get hunger pains. So he was really hungry. He needed to stop and eat. I stopped and built a small fire. Cutting off a nice thick slab of salt pork, I roasted it, and with a piece of cold cornbread made a sandwich. Putting out my fire, I was on my way again. I ate as I trotted along. I felt much better. I came into Tahlequah from the northeast. Okay, so putting out his fire, so he ate his salt pork, roasted it with a piece of cold cornbread, made a sandwich. Putting out my fire, I was on my way again. I ate as I trotted along. I felt much better. So now he's nice and full. He's ready to keep on going with his trip. I came into Tahlequah from the northeast. At the outskirts of town, I hid my flour sack and provisions, keeping the gunny sack. I walked into town. So before he got into town, he hid all of his the food that he had brought in, and then he walked into town just with the gunny sack. I was scared of Tahlequah and the people. I had never seen such a big town and so many people. There was store after store, some of them 2 stories high. That means two stories high. It means it has a second floor. The wagon yard had wagons on top of wagons. Does that actually mean that there's a wagon on top of another one on top of another one? No, that just means lots of wagons. Teams, buggies, and horses. 2 young ladies about my age stopped, stared at me, and then giggled. My blood boiled, but I could understand. After all, I had 3 sisters. They couldn't help it because they were women folks. I went on. So he was just saying girls like to gossip. That's pretty much what he was saying here. I saw a big man coming up the street. The bright shiny star on his vest looked as big as a bucket. I saw the long black gun at his side and I froze in my tracks. I heard of sheriffs and marshals, but I never seen one. Stories repeated about them in the mountains and told how fast they were with a gun and how many men they'd killed. So he got scared when he saw the sheriff or marshal. He didn't know which one it was, but he got scared of him because he'd heard about how fast they are with a gun and how many men they kill. The closer he came, the more frightened I got. I knew it was the end for me. I could just see him aiming his big black gun and shooting me between the eyes. It seemed like a miracle that he passed by, hardly glancing at me. Breathing a sigh, whew, I walked on, seeing the wonders of the world. So he thought that the marshal was going to come to him, and I don't know what he thought he was going to do to him, but when he just passed by him and barely even looked at him, he thought, oh, thank goodness. Passing a large store, I stopped and stared. There in the window was the most wonderful sight I had ever seen. Everything under the sun. Overalls, jackets, bolts of beautiful cloth, new harnesses, collars, bridles, and then my eyes did pop open. There were several guns, and one of them had 2 barrels. I couldn't believe it. 2 barrels? I had seen several guns, but never one with 2 barrels. Then I saw something else. So he saw a bunch of guns, and he saw jackets, he saw cloth. His eyes were just whoa, there's so many cool things to buy at this store. And he'd never even seen a gun with 2 barrels, so that was a complete amazement to him. Then I saw something else. The sun was just right, and the plate glass was a perfect mirror. I saw the full reflection of myself for the first time in my life. So he'd never seen what he looked like in a mirror. And this was the first time he ever saw. I could see that I did look a little odd. My straw-colored hair was long and shaggy and was bushed out like a corn tassel that had been hit by a wind. I tried to smooth it down with my hands. This helped some, but not much. What I needed was a good combing, and I had no comb. Okay, so he looked at himself and he thought, okay, I do look a little odd, because the girls were giggling last time, right? So he's like, okay, I give it to them. I do look a little strange. And he said his his hair looked so messed up, like the wind had hit it. It was just a mess. But he couldn't fix it too much because he needed a comb and he didn't have one. My overalls were patched and faded, but they were clean. My shirt had pulled out. I tucked it back in, so his shirt was all pulled out of his pants, and he tucked it in nice and neat. I looked at my bare feet and winced. They were as brown as dead sycamore leaves. The spider web pattern of raw red scratches looked odd in the saddle brown skin. I thought, well, I won't have to pick any more blackberries, and the scratches will soon go away. So remember, he's not wearing shoes either, so his feet are really dirty and brown. And then in the brown, you can still see some messed up red scratches from him picking blackberries. So he's looking pretty messed up right now. So that's probably why the girls were giggling. I pumped up one of my arms and thought surely the muscle was going to pop right through my thin blue shirt. I stuck out my tongue. It was as red as pokeberry juice, and anything that color was supposed to be healthy. So he pumped up one of his arms to see how strong he was. And he has some strong muscles, and then he checked his tongue and it was nice and red. So he said, okay, well, I guess I'm healthy. After making a few faces at myself, I put my thumbs in my ears and was making mule ears when 2 old women came by. They stopped and stared at me. I stared back. As they turned to go on their way, I heard one of them say something to the other. The words were hard to catch, but I did hear one word, wild. As I said before, they couldn't help it. They were women folks. So maybe they were women folks, but if you see a kid with his hair all messed up and dirty feet and scratches all over, and then you see him putting his thumb in his ears and pretending to be a mule, you might say wild too, right? Okay, let's see. As I turned to leave, my eyes again fell on the overalls and the bolts of cloth. I thought of my mother, father, and sisters. Here was an opportunity to make amends for leaving home without telling anyone. Okay, so make amends is to make things better with whoever is upset with you. Okay, so he wanted to make amends, make things better with his mother, father, and sisters because he left home without telling them, so they were probably worried sick. I entered the store. I bought a pair of overalls for Papa. After telling the storekeeper how big my mother and sisters were, I bought several yards of cloth. I also bought a large sack of candy. Glancing down at my bare feet, the storekeeper said, "I have some good shoes." I told him I didn't need any shoes. He asked if that would be all. I nodded. Okay, so the storekeeper said, "I have good shoes you should buy," because he saw his feet and they looked so messed up. But he said he didn't need any shoes. He added up the bill. I handed him my $10. He gave me my change. After wrapping up the bundles, he helped me put them in my sack. Lifting it to my shoulder, I turned and left the store. Out in the street, I picked out a friendly looking old man and asked him where the depot was. He told me to go down to the last street and turn right, go as far as I could, and I couldn't miss it. I thanked him and started on my way. Okay, so he bought everything that he wanted to buy for his family. Then the storekeeper went ahead and helped him pack it all into his sack. And then he found someone. He said, "Oh, this looks like a friendly old man. Let me ask him where the depot was." And then he got his instructions and started heading to the depot. And that's where his puppies are supposed to be. So let's see what happens. Leaving the main part of town, I started up a long street through the residential section. Residential means residents live there, which means this is just where people live. I had never seen so many beautiful houses. They were all different colors. The lawns were neat and clean and looked like green carpets. I saw a man pushing some kind of a mowing machine. I stopped to watch the whirling blades. He gawked at me. I hurried on. Gawking is like almost staring at someone with your mouth open. I heard a lot of shouting and laughing ahead of me. Not wanting to miss anything, I walked a little faster. I saw what was making the noise. More kids than I had ever seen were playing around a big red brick building. I thought some rich man lived there and was giving a party for his children. Walking up to the edge of the playground, I stopped to watch. So he hears kids playing, and he sees them playing on the playground. He thought that there was a party going on that some rich man was putting together. The boys and girls were about my age and were as thick as flies around a sorghum mill. They were milling, running, and jumping. Teeter-totters and swings were loaded down with them. Everyone was laughing and having a big time. Okay, so they were having a really fun time at the playground, a bunch of kids. Over against the building, a large blue pipe ran up on the angle from the ground. A few feet from the top, there was a bend in it. The pipe seemed to go into the building. Boys were crawling into its dark mouth. I counted 9 of them. One boy stood about 6 feet from the opening with a stick in his hand, staring. Okay, so he's seeing a bunch of boys going in and out of a pipe that's going into the building. And he said he counted about 9 boys. Staring goggle-eyed, trying to figure out what they were doing, I got a surprise. Out of the hollow pipe spurted a boy. He sailed through the air and lit on his feet. The boy with the stick marked the ground where he landed. All 9 of them came shouting out, one behind the other. As each boy landed, a new mark was scratched. So they're trying to see who can land the farthest away, looks like. They ganged around looking at the lines. There was a lot of loud talking, pointing, and arguing. Then all lines were erased and a new scorekeeper was picked out. The others crawled back into the pipe. I figured out how the game was played. After climbing to the top of the slides, the boys turned around and sat down. One at a time, they came flying out feet first. The one that shot out the furthest was the winner. I thought how wonderful it would be if I could just slide down just one time. One boy spying me standing on the corner came over. Okay, so the boys are all playing. They're playing this game, seeing who can land the furthest when they fly out of that pipe. And Billy's just there watching, wishing he could play too. And then one boy saw him and came to Billy. Okay, let's see what happens. Looking me up and down, he asked, "Do you go to school here?" I said, "School?" He said, "Sure, school. What did you think it was?" "Oh, no, I don't go to school here." "Do you go to Jefferson?" "No, I don't go there either." "Don't you go to school at all?" "Sure, I go to school." "Where?" "At home." "You go to school at home?" I nodded. "What grade are you in?" I said I wasn't in any grade. Puzzled, he said, "You go to school at home and don't know what grade you're in? Who teaches you?" "My mother." "What does she teach you?" I said, "Reading, writing, and arithmetic, and I bet I'm just as good as you good at it as you are." He asked, "Don't you have any shoes?" I said, "Sure, I have shoes." "Why aren't you wearing them?" "I don't wear shoes until it gets cold." He laughed and asked where I lived. I said, "Back in the hills." He said, "Oh, you're a hillbilly." He ran back to the mob. I saw him pointing at me and talking to several boys. They started my way yelling, "Hillbilly, hillbilly." Well, that's not nice. So the boy came and started asking Billy all about himself. Billy told him he is homeschooled, and the boy started laughing because Billy only wears shoes in the winter. And then he called him a hillbilly and made all the other boys start yelling hillbilly at him, which is really mean. Just before they reached me, a bell started ringing. Turning, they ran to the front of the building, lined up in 2 long lines, and marched out like little tin soldiers. And marching like little tin soldiers, disappeared inside the school. The playground was silent. I was all alone and felt lonely and sad. Oh, poor Billy, because they started bullying him and then they all left. So he was all alone and felt sad about it. I heard a noise at my right. I didn't have to turn around to recognize what it was. Someone was using a hoe. I'd know that sound if I heard it in a dark night. It was a little old white-headed woman working in a flower bed. So he saw a little old woman that was working in a flower bed with her tool. Looking again at the long blue pipe, I thought, there's no one around. Maybe I could have one slide anyway. Okay, he's going to try to go down that slide. I eased over and looked at the dark hollow. It looked scary, but I thought of all the other boys I had seen crawl into it. So I could see the last mark on the ground and thought, I bet I can beat that. Laying my sack down, I started climbing up. The farther I went, the darker and more scary it got. Just as I reached the top, my feet slipped. Down I sailed, all the way down. I tried to grab onto something, but there was nothing to grab. Uh-oh. So he put his sack down and he started climbing up, and it got scarier and scarier. And when he reached the top, he slipped. So he didn't go down on his own. You know, he just slipped, so he's going down not the way he wanted to, okay? I'm sure some great champions had slid out of that pipe, and no doubt more than one world record had been broken. But if someone had been there when I came out, I know the record I would set would stand today in all its glory. So he said he came out way further than them, probably, okay? I came out just like I went in, feet first and belly down. My legs were sprayed out like a bean shoot stalk, arms flailing in the air. I zoomed out and up. I seemed to hang suspended in the air at the peak of my climb. I could see the hard-packed ground far below. As I started down, I shut my eyes tight and gritted my teeth. This didn't seem to help. With a splattering sound, I landed. I felt the air whoosh out between my teeth. I tried to scream, but I had no wind left to make a sound. So he kind of landed pretty bad, if you ask me. After bouncing a couple of times, I finally settled down to earth. I lay spread-eagled for a few seconds and then slowly got to my knees. Hearing loud laughter, I looked around. It was a little old lady with the hoe in her hand. She hollered and asked how I liked it. Without answering, I grabbed up my gunny sack and left. Far up to the street, I looked back. The little old lady was sitting down, rocking with laughter. I couldn't understand these town people. If they weren't staring at a fellow, they were laughing at him. So see, I think he thinks that the old lady was laughing at him to make fun of him, but she wasn't. She just thought it was cute that he was, you know, from out of town and he was enjoying the slide, and how he landed was kind of silly. But Billy was not taking this well. He was getting upset with them for laughing. But that chapter is all done.